Join On the Other Hand today for this.
Politics are downstream from culture. Everything that's occurring in the cultural moment right now will shape the politics. So things that we see happening in our media, that's going to shape the politics. The way the conversations occur on social media, that shapes the politics.
This is On the Other Hand. A podcast sponsored by Braver Angels, Arkansas, where hope and common ground meet.
Each episode features community leaders from Arkansas and beyond sharing stories and insights on how we can strengthen both our relationships and our communities. In the first part of our conversation with Jim Hudson, we explored his leadership philosophy and the way that's enacted on a daily basis where he works currently in state government. Now, let's get to the second part of our conversation with Jim Hudson. So, Jim, as we were finishing up our episode 1, we started to actually move into talking about leading in polarized environments. And I'm guessing that in a typical week at the office for you, that you actually experience some disagreements and difficulties. So describe what that might look like for you in your job.
A lot of times the difficulties will be more in the political realm. And so there'll be debates over policies. It could be debates over how you allocate resource, usually money. And those disagreements or contentiousness, I'm usually not handling that by myself. I'm usually part of a team that's having a conversation that would involve other members of the administration, maybe external stakeholders, members of the public, trade groups, or policy advocacy organizations who are looking for a particular outcome that maybe they're not able to get. And so we have to be able to go in and argue our points and then figure out, is there a middle ground? Sometimes there is. A lot of times there may not be a middle ground because we're just dealing with policy choices that don't lend themselves well to a particular compromise. If you have a policy already set and we're talking about the execution, and that's easier to compromise on the particulars. But sometimes there are just things that we disagree on, and then the way that we go about the disagreeing can be very, very important. And it doesn't mean necessarily we kind of meet each other in the middle, but it does mean that we can depart friends in the conversation and there's no acrimony that carries over. That's very important to me. One of the things that I try real hard to do is, one, to be clear, to have my convictions out there. I don't want people leaving a conversation with me and just kind of going, well, wow, I wonder what he thinks. I want them to know what I think, but then I want them to come away feeling respected, heard. I want to be able to play back to them. Here's what I heard from you, and here's why I disagree. Here's why we're not going to be able to do that. And as much as it's my decision to make in those circumstances, then I will close with the decision. But to the extent that it's not mine, for the governor's, for example, then that's obviously her prerogative to how she closes out the conversation. But again, for me, it's just very, very important that the way we go about that is respectful. And that, like, for example, I would think, I'm a Republican and I've served in a Republican administration, and my convictions are very conservative convictions. But I bet you, if you talk to my Democrat friends, colleagues in the General Assembly, if you were to ask them how I treat them, they would tell you a good report, that they feel respected by me. And when they call me about a constituent matter, it's occurring, something that's bothering one of their constituents and involves my department, I will serve them just as well as I serve a member who's Republican in the General Assembly, because their citizens are just as important as citizens of a Republican member of the General Assembly.
Sounds a lot like what we focus on in Braver Angels, John, don't you think?
It's amazing the overlaps that I see between the work of Braver Angels and the practices of our friend Jim here. With regards to dealing with legislators who come from myriad backgrounds, what advice would you give to leaders trying to lead skillfully without inflaming division?
Well, one, you just have to understand that you have to understand the need that the members of the General Assembly have. They're coming, with a particular need and whatever the encounter is. Sometimes it's a principal need, like they need to advocate a certain policy direction that, quite often I'm able to kind of say I agree with. But most of the time, the conversations are really about what's happening in the district, that my district needs something. And, they really get elected and reelected based upon the quality of the service they have to the district. And, they just need to hear from me that I care about their problem. And I'm going to make sure that we're able to look at it and we're able to deal with it. It may not be that we can solve it exactly the way they want us to solve it, but I want to try to solve it some way, if at all possible. If it depends upon me, I want to be able to do that. And I think that just kind of goes a long way. I had a member of the General Assembly say, because I solved one of his constituent problems, his constituent thought that he was such a great and effective member of the General Assembly. And he was calling me to say, I don't deserve the credit. It's you that did that. No, 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 no. You made the phone call to me. So you get the credit. That's how this thing works. I didn't get elected to anything, right? I got appointed by my governor. So you're the one who gets the credit, and I'm A-okay with that. I really am. Just remember it when my budget's up for approval when we're in fiscal session here in a few months.
You just referenced dealing with legislators who sometimes find themselves in polarized conversations. Can you think of other examples that you might use to illustrate to other people the importance of listening first rather than pounding your agenda?
Well, the listening part is incredibly important. I think that the current environment that we're in globally, nationally, certainly, with the intensity of social media, the attention spans are so short. And I think the real temptation is to be framing your argument as the person is talking and you're not listening. And so, one of the things that I think I've learned is to ask the question, why would that person say that? Why are they saying that? It could be that they're, genuinely evil people, and that's why they're saying that. I mean, that's certainly a possibility. That's true maybe about some people. They could be coming from that position of a place of conviction, that they think that what they're saying is absolutely right. They could be coming from a place of not being well informed, in which case they lack data. It could be that they're just trying to win an argument, but I need to kind of figure out what that is. And in as much as it is a question of me providing data that can help answer a question that can take some heat out of the conversation, that's the easiest thing to do. Oh, no, you're mistaken about that. Here's what really this is, okay? And just explain. If somebody is trying to advance a policy position that's in opposition to the policy position that my governor has and the administration has, then I have to advocate, for the soundness of our direction and the importance of the direction that we're going and why that's really important. But the way that I go about doing that can be respectful. I'm not raising my voice. I'm not wagging my finger. I'm not demeaning them. I'm not making them seem stupid. I'm just arguing this is why this is the better idea. And let the ideas speak for themselves. If it's a good idea that is well reasoned, well developed, there's a great plan that goes with it, then why do I need theatrics? I don't need theatrics, right? I just need to go argue the point and let the policy speak for itself. I'd say that's a skill that I've had to kind of continue to hone. I think it's part of the leadership quotient you have to have. I think particularly, as you deal with members of the General Assembly, you just got to be very deft in how you do that because they are very important. They're important to our political process. Their needs are important. Yet, I also understand there can only be one leader in terms of the state government, and that's my boss, Governor Sanders.
It sounds a lot like the words may be important in an exchange between two people, but exploring and confirming the motivation behind the words really leads to greater understanding, maybe less conflict, maybe less selling, and more sharing. How does that sound?
I think that's good. I think that's the exact way I want to approach it. Is it's about having good common understanding. Are we on the same page about just the basic information? And then we can draw our own conclusions. But if we're not on the same page in terms of the information, that's going to be hard to really have a reasonable, rational conversation. John, April, I'd also say this: Arkansas is such a relational state, right? It's important that we have the relationships. And so one of the things that I always want to do is just talk to people outside the context of an argument or a problem. So when we have our meetings with the General Assembly, and we had one this morning, I'm going around and I'm talking to members. I'm asking how they're doing. I know about what health situations that they have. I know that one of our members of the General Assembly, Representative Fred Allen, is representative in Little Rock. And he's talked about this publicly. He's had a prostate cancer kind of bout a few years ago. He's a Democrat, right? Good man, great man. Saw him on the billboard this morning for advertising, encourage people to go get their PSAs tested. And I told him that this morning. I saw you on the billboard as I was driving in. How's your health? How are you doing? And I actually had a chance to pray with him. I saw him in the Capitol at one point last year when he's coming off this health scare. And I said, how you doing? He told me how he was doing. He said, pray for me. I said, you know what? One of my things is if somebody asks me to pray for them, I don't wait and do it later. I do it right then because I'll forget later. And so I had a chance to put my arm on him and pray for him right there in the rotunda of the Capitol. When you pray for somebody, one, it's hard for them to resent you, and it's hard for you to resent them too.
So much there about respecting the dignity of the human being, regardless of the position that they're taking. And I really appreciate that. As you've been talking about the importance of conviction, I keep coming back in my head to this. What happens if you're asked to do something that's against something that you have a conviction for? So whether it be you're having to do something that a boss, and this doesn't have to be just with the current position you're in, Jim. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot with
Sure.
the governor at this point, but in any kind of position, when we're asked to, maybe we've made the argument where to the person who's asking, who's above of us or in the hierarchy, and it's asking us to do something, and the arguments, maybe it's been heard, maybe it hasn't, but we're then being asked to pass something down to the people that we're leading that is not consistent with our own convictions. And Jim, I'm just wondering how you go about dealing with that kind of internal, maybe competing convictions of wanting to respect your own convictions, but also be respectful of the person, the hierarchy that you're in.
Yep. I think the first thing I always have to do, because I tend to be kind of a real high conviction guy, and I think my ethics are incredibly important. My views of what is right or wrong, hold those very deeply. But not everything is about convictions. Some things are just opinions. And to be clear on what this is really, I've got an opinion about this, and I got a preference that I'd rather the way we did this was a little different than how we're going to do this. I have to hold those loosely because as a leader, I'm first a follower, right? And so I'm following the leader that I'm under, and that's the governor. And one, she's never put me in a place where I felt like our integrity is at risk, that there's something that's compromising our shared values that she and I both have as Christ followers. Never an issue, just it's never even a risk in my mind. So I think the real question is, do I have opinions about things and preferences about directions? Absolutely. Hold those very loosely. And I will debate and I'll kind of point out alternatives. But once the direction is set and it comports with my ethical center and my calling as a Christ follower, it's my responsibility to go be a follower at that point, right? And if I can't be a follower, then I need to stop and ask myself, can I even be in the role that I'm in? What I can't do is somehow be a leader and then also be in the opposition. Right? I'll be completely ineffective as a leader. So as I tell my people, Actually, I'm leading. I expect you to argue the points. I want you to raise your objections because we'll get to a better decision. If I'm hearing more points of view, I can talk myself into all sorts of stupid things. So you be the counter narrative when we're in the room trying to make the decision. And then when I get to the point where I'm going around the room and I'm asking for, okay, this is where we're at, this is the decision I'm making. Can you go do this? You have the ability to go do this. And I get yeses around the table. I'm expecting execution at that point. And I don't think we have the ability to kind of just silently protest and to not go execute on a decision. I don't think that we really have those high stakes existential sort of ethical quandaries as much. I think the team that we built, we have a high degree of alignment on that we're just going to do the right thing, and we're not going to do silly things that impugn our character.
So what about when there is maybe a lot of preferences, but not as much convictions, and there's not really an ideal option? So I'm thinking about a team in your own team, how you communicate with your team when there are so many ideas. How do you reach consensus, or do you try to do that, or do you just end up having to make the decision? How does that work?
Well, one, I think it's trusting in the team concept, that you've got different gift mixes around the table, and different life experiences, different levels of understanding and intellectual capability, and seeing if you can see somebody on the team who may be better at this, and to vest them with the ability to kind of go be the lead on the issue and to help work out what is the best solution. Bring it back to me, let me kind of understand what it is, and at least have the opportunity to say yes or no on it, but to not feel like everything has always got to be a high stakes conversation. I think entrepreneurial organizations learn how to do this. They learn how to move in and out on things. We'll try this, back to the earlier conversation or last episode. We'll experiment on things, and so hold it loosely, go give it a try. And if your way doesn't work, somebody else had a competing idea, we'll let them take a whack at it if you fail at it, and that's okay. Failure helps us learn. It's an okay thing.
So I'm curious about whether how that relates to your connection with faith and public service, because I'm hearing some overlap with we can try out things and not be scared to do that, with the conversation we had earlier in the last episode about risk. So anything you want to say more about in terms of the relationship between faith and public service as you think about where you are currently?
Well, how about maybe a little bit of a kind of augment that faith and repentance almost in some respects. That I had this conversation with all of our leaders a few days ago, in terms of getting more performance, better performance out of the organization. Not everybody's excelling, and my first approach on that is coach them up. You're a leader. You see who's missing the mark, coach them up. Help them get better. I don't want to run people off. I want to help them get better. At some point, you got to call the question. If you can't get them coached up to enough to be able to kind of do the job, but the first thing is to coach. But here's the exception on that. It's the character question. I can't coach character. It's a hard thing to be able to do. I can point out the gap. I can illustrate that this is a behavior that's inconsistent with the values of the organization, and it's just not something we're going to put up with. The thing that I will not put up with is mistreating somebody else, to treat people disrespectfully, either a customer or a coworker. I don't see how you coach that up, except there's a story I read once about a man on a donkey going to Damascus, and he got knocked off the donkey, right? And so we can have our own the road to Damascus experience. For those who are kind of maybe not as familiar with the story of the Apostle Paul, who was not a Christ follower, became a Christ follower. People can have dramatic turns, dramatic changes that are supernatural sort of experiences in some way. I want to give margin for that too. But absent that, I manage out very quickly the people who are not going to be helpful and who are harmful to other people.
Jim, what challenges do you think Arkansas leaders will face most in the coming years, both at the local level and the state level? What is it we're facing given the changes that we're experiencing?
Politics are downstream from culture, right? And so everything that's occurring in the cultural moment right now will shape the politics. So things that we see happening in our media, that's going to shape the politics. The way the conversations occur on social media, that shapes the politics. It's our continual struggle with poverty that we have in the state, that we have just generation upon generation that have stayed trapped in poverty. And I think the temptation again is to some people kind of just shrug their shoulders and say, "What are you going to do?" That there are just certain counties in this state where you just have endemic poverty, and I just don't think that that's acceptable. That we may not be successful in fixing it. We may still have some failures in the efforts, but it ought to bother us to our core that it's true, that it exists. And so I think continuing to battle against generational poverty, poor educational outcomes, those are things that we just got to continue to need to attack. And then I think in general, also rural Arkansas, the plight of rural Arkansas, and those things play into that. The depopulation of rural Arkansas, the lack of opportunity in rural Arkansas, the struggles that our farmers face, those are all things that are very real, that shape public policy. And yet, I would say I'm very hopeful about the future of our state. There are lots of great things happening in our state. The amount of just success that we see in Northwest Arkansas is just staggering, and the economic engine that it is for our state now is truly staggering. So a lot of reasons to be very hopeful there, and other parts of the state as well. Central Arkansas is doing very well too.
A good segment of our listeners tend to be young or maturing leaders. They may also have been victims of the Peter Principle, where we are often promoted to make more money, but we're often promoted out of where we were an expert and not necessarily gotten the training or the guidance to be that next level, that leader. Do you have coaching recommendations for that leader who has been moved up, quote, the ladder in terms of maintaining clarity and humility in light of their new challenges?
There's a Christian author, he's since passed, Brennan Manning, had a saying, "Be who you is, or you is who you ain't." And I think just that a maturing leader, a growing leader gets to a point, and I'm so in this place now, where you're comfortable with who you are. You're not kicking against the internal goads of like, I want to be something different than I am. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, as scripture says. I'm wired a certain way. I've been designed a certain way by my creator. I have certain gifts. And when I'm in that space, when I'm functioning in my wheelhouse, I'm at my best. And so to be able to kind of like say, that's good, and don't worry about the money part, right? And I think that's one of the challenges I think young leaders have is, they want to figure out how to move into leadership so they can make more money. And you just may not be ready for that yet. Focus on, what do I need to do? What skills do I need to acquire? What life experiences do I need to have so I can be a good leader? Trust that the rewards will come along at the right pace at the right time. But control the part you can control, which is your own development. Be a lifelong learner, right? Constantly learn, figure out, how you can be better. What skills do you not have? What knowledge do you need to acquire? I think it's that sort of stuff that makes somebody successful over the long run. Am I providing the return on investment to the employer, right? That's a more dicey conversation if I'm not providing more value as I'm getting more compensation. That's where people get into a risky situation. They're in a negative situation with the employer, particularly for a private business. No one likes a negative return on equity. They want a positive return. And so I'm giving you more than you're giving me in terms of pay. We all need to be doing that calculation, even in government work, every single day. And so, just ask yourself, what can I do to be more valuable to the organization?
Before we wrap up, I think about sometimes there's a story, it could be small or behind the scenes, that we ask our interviewees to tell us that gives them hope about leadership or public service. And I wonder if there's anything for you.
Gosh, I think about as soon as you were talking about that, I got a guy who leads my revenue office. His name's Wayne Hamrick, and just a wonderful soul, just a great man, great man. He also has this wonderful gift of being a good decorator. And, he'll decorate interior houses and things like that. And I came in around Christmas time, and I was expecting, my administrative team to put up, our Christmas tree in the lobby. There was a completely different Christmas tree in the lobby. And it was like, Martha Stewart Christmas tree. And I'm like, where'd the Christmas tree come from? I'm like, oh, Wayne did it. I'm like, of course Wayne did it, right? And then I go down to Wayne's building. He's in a different building than I am. And I walk in there, and there's like this huge Christmas tree, in his building that he did. And you know what? Nobody asked Wayne to do that. I mean, he just wanted the workplace to look nice. He wanted to give a gift to his coworkers. DFA, and I frankly, I would say all state government is full of people like that. I was one of those folks before I became a state employee who made fun of state employees, who kind of had the caricature of people not working real hard, and particularly like in the revenue offices and the DMV. I mean, we're constantly the butt of a cultural joke there, right? I mean, in cartoons, people who work in the DMV are played by sloths, right? So that's the joke right there. But here's what I found. I have found the nicest people, the hardest working people working in state government, and compared to the private sector. And so every single day I see people who are going out of their way to do great things. And here's what if we're going to wrap up. Here's what I would tell you what I wrap up with whenever I'm in front of my team. I tell them two things. And it is a discipline that I have. And I've told the people who lead teams, now go and do likewise. I say these two things to them. One, what you do is incredibly important. It's incredibly important. It helps improve the quality of life in the state of Arkansas. So this is a better place for people to come, people to raise their kids, people to work, people to grow old in the state of Arkansas because you do your job. I'm convinced of that. I'm convinced of that because if it wasn't important, we wouldn't pay you to do it. It's that important. So one, what you do matters. It's important. Two, because you have choices and there's a free market out there, you would go do something else. You have chosen to make your life's calling working here at DFA. And for that, I owe you a thank you. Thank you. Everybody needs to hear that. What I do matters. Even though I think it may be bureaucratic and I'm trudging away, kind of in this, faceless office someplace, it matters. It makes a difference. And somebody recognizes that I'm doing it and they're telling me thank you. Gosh, if we could just make that a regular discipline in all facets of life, to recognize the importance of the individual because they bear the image of God, and that alone makes them important. And then we say we recognize them, and we thank them for their contribution. Wow, it could be a lot better around here.
Jim, is there any one last thought that occurs to you that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I appreciate the forum that you have here and the fact that you're having the conversation. I think these are wonderful things to do, to learn to be understanding, to learn to, even if you're across a divide, theologically, philosophically, politically, whatever. The one thing that we do all have in common is we're all Arkansans, and our futures are intertwined. And so let's go make this state better together.
Thank you so much, Jim, for taking the time to be interviewed by us on our show today. We really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed the final part of today's conversation with Jim Hudson and left with some ideas on how you can improve your own leadership. If you liked what you heard, share the episode with a friend.
And remember that On the Other Hand offers dozens of other interviews like this one. You can find the On the Other Hand podcast inside your favorite podcast app or on the podcast page of the Braver Angels Arkansas website. You can find that at arkansas.dept www.braverangels.org. On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
From your host, April Chatham Carpenter,
and guest co-host John O'Brien.
Join us in working to make our relationships and communities better.